What?
She don't need him. Oh my god, listen, if Sophie gets back with Rob after all of this, Kay is gonna be so hurt. She's gonna be so angry that she will probably not be friends with Sophie anymore. We'll see what happens. I gave him so many chances and he left me anyway. I feel stupid. Alright, let's move on to Emily and Kobe.
Holy.
Emily and Kobe just got done
Holy.
telling their parents about her pregnancy. And Emily's
Holy.
mom was like, oh god, she's gotta get the hell out, David. He promised us she wouldn't have a third kid here. And Dave's like, yeah, well, maybe they're just gonna stay until they find a house. That's why they're telling us this. And Mom goes, she's gonna want to stay here as long as possible, David. We gotta get her the hell out of here. So Emily and Kobe come back to the parents after they put their kids to sleep. And the dad proposes that they find a starter home. It doesn't have to be their forever home because it's going to be impossible to find your forever home as your first home. And she's like, yes, Dad, I know it's not going to be our forever home. And he's like, yeah, just get a house that'll provide for you and your 3 kids right now. And she's like, well, Dad, I need to love my home too. Like, I want to go in my house and I need to love my house, okay? And they're like, oh, brother. Okay, Kobe, what do you think? And he says, well, I think all the houses that we've looked at so far are livable. And Dad goes, exactly. See, Emily, you're never going to find a perfect house right now. And it's just important to find a house and go. Okay? For your own good, for your own family, for your own future. Okay? This is going to be good for you. And Kobe tells her dad, listen, sir, I promised you that we wouldn't have a third kid here, so I'm going to keep that promise. Even if it means renting, we will get out of here. And Emily goes, no, we're not, Kobe. We're not renting, because the whole point of staying with my parents is so that we save money, okay? And her mom goes, Emily, you've been here for 5 years, okay? I think that's enough time for you to have saved enough money. Well, I definitely wasn't expecting this kind of reaction from you guys, duh. Kobe sides with Emily's parents. Smart. But he also does it in a way that is not disrespectful to Emily. Honestly, I am always impressed by Kobe. I'm a Kobe stan forever and ever, through and through. But Emily's not happy with this. Princess Emily is not happy with this because remember, she is the princess and everybody must be on her side. So she was like, okay, even though my parents aren't on my side, I thought my husband would be on my side. Why? What? He can't be on your side. He doesn't have the same privileges as you do with your parents because you are their daughter. He is not. Do you understand? So
Bonbon, jolie voiture de mise. Un monde de saveurs déchaînées dans chaque bouchée.
Kylie Minogue, Tension Tour. Kylie.
Stuff, dude.
Tickets at Kylie.com. AEG presents Kylie Minogue, Tension Tour. Tension 2, out now.
so Dad's starting to feel bad because they're focusing so much on like get out, and like this should be a happy time with Emily and her 3rd baby. So he tells her, please do not take this the wrong way. We're very happy that you're pregnant, but you have to get a house for your own good.
Oh my god, if someone mentions I have to think about moving out, where is it not clear that I have said I want to move out and buy a home? Who went and looked at houses? I did. Who got the realtor? I did. So it's not like I'm not the one taking the steps to go buy the house.
And Emily's mad at Kobe too because he didn't have her back. And like, what the fuck do you want from him? He's in a shit position. He literally the best response in my opinion. So yeah, Emily is hormonal. She's pregnant. She is very emotional. She's crying. She's like, oh my god, okay, oh my god, I'm so pregnant. So emotional. All right, girl, I'll give you that. Okay, just blah blah, whatever. But this is Princess Emily stuff now, okay?
I heard you loud and clear, and I really feel like they were attacking me, and that my husband is not standing up Yes, sir.
3 out of 4 documents done, and I still have to do the other part. I haven't got to the other part yet.
Like
What
what?
doesn't understand about that?
So you haven't.
No!
I
knew it.
I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. He's still testing her. He wants to delay this as long as possible because he wants to make sure she is going to be a quiet, perfect little Stepford wife. You know, when Jasmine was saying the things like earlier in the season, he's trying to control me, he's trying to take away my freedom or whatever, you know, along those lines. I was like, come on, Jasmine, you were just doing too much. You were exaggerating. But no, it's true. It's absolutely true. It's just easy for everyone to hate Jasmine because Jasmine was crazy from the front. She showed her crazy, alright? And it was easy to hate her, one, because she's a woman, and two, because she's batshit, okay? And three, she, you know, played this perfect, innocent man who doesn't know any better. He's like weird and losery and like he doesn't know what to do. And so everyone sympathized with him. But he started slipping. Little by little, his mask started to fall. But because Jasmine is so, like, her reactions are so crazy that it's just easier to blame her and to hate her. But you guys, Gino, I think, acts a certain way on camera and off camera. And he tries really hard to control her. He knows how to be a person in a relationship. He knows. Because he's not dumb. And it worked for him for a really long time. And I don't know if anyone sees what I see. If you do, please let me know in the comments. Because I fuck with you then.
I don't know why Jasmine's under the impression that I submitted the paperwork. I am working on it. I just haven't submitted it yet because it's time consuming.
Bitch, you don't have a job. You don't fucking work, bitch. And bitch, you quit your job so you can help her with all the paperwork and all the immigration stuff. Like, bitch, you quit your job. Bitch, you don't work. Bitch, you said you quit your job so that you could help her process all her paperwork and do everything. So, bitch, what are you doing? Oh, never mind. You watch porn and play fantasy football all day. Listen, I don't even want to hear. Oh, she has.
Mm-hmm.
As you can probably imagine, it's not a very nice story. But I like to think that it's something others can take something away from, be that a life lesson or whatever else. I was pretty wild in college. You wouldn't think it if you looked at me, but it's true. I did okay in my freshman year, trying to keep my head straight and focus on my studies, but then the sophomore party lifestyle hit me pretty hard. I've also always looked a little older than I was, so although getting carded was standard on campus, if I drove into the city, I could pick up a six-pack and then introduce it to a healthy study party balance. I was in a few friends, so forced to walk home from some bar at 2 a.m. and spent all my money on shots with no charge on my phone to call a cab. A normal person might have that happen to them once, but me, it happened at least half a dozen times that I can remember. The last time, I had just gotten back on the campus after walking maybe 2 or 3 miles completely drunk, and I was incredibly tired. I was sobering up, in a terrible mood, and all I wanted to do was get back to my dorm so I could get to that bottle of vodka that I kept hidden in my dorm. But then, I ran into this kindly stranger. There's a guy smoking a cigarette outside his block, and he says something sort of soft with me as I walk past him. It was something like, crazy night, or wild night, and I must have just grunted until I saw him smoking. I asked him to bum one, and did so. Then we made a little small talk before he invited me inside for a beer and to charge my phone. This guy was still living in the dorms, albeit the nicer kind on the other side of campus, but having alcohol was still very much against the rules. Most heavy partiers had something stashed away somewhere, but this guy had a mini fridge that had beer cans tucked behind sodas. He said no one suspected him because he was such a nerd, and he was kind of right, I guess, because he didn't give off party vibes, but I just found myself seriously impressed. Well, more just wanting to have another beer before I walked the final 20 minutes to my dorm, but impressed nevertheless. I go up to this guy's room, and there it was, beer, hiding in plain sight. I asked to use the guy's bathroom before we drank, and he showed me where it was. And when I got back, we talked and drank, and at one point, I knew I probably should have started walking back, but I figured that I could just rest a little longer. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the last thing I remember. I woke up the next morning in the hallway outside the guy's apartment. I was fully clothed, but my shoes were out there with me. It must have been late morning because it was pretty busy outside, meaning people definitely must have stepped over me while passed out in the hallway. I felt like death, and it probably looked about the same too. I know I attracted a few looks as I sort of moseyed across campus and back to my room. I've been really drunk before, but never blackout drunk, and let me tell you, it was not a good feeling. I haven't even put it together why I'd been cruising along just fine before that one beer knocked me out completely cold. I honestly just figured that I was exhausted from hours of drinking and miles of walking, but as I said, I had made that walk 5 or 6 times previous, probably having drank even more on some occasions, and I'd never blacked out like that until that night. I figured a lot of you probably had put it together already. Things are sometimes clearer from a distance like that, you know? But never underestimate the power of denial, especially when it comes to young men. I think a year went by before I was really faced with what had happened to me. I always knew in the back of my head, but like I'd already covered, I had that head buried firmly in the sand. In the 12 months or so since I blacked out, the same thing happened to multiple guys from our university and even some locals too. They were walking someplace late at night, ran into a kind of stranger who offered them beer or maybe a phone charge or whatever they just happened to need at that moment. They then went to this guy's apartment or got into his car or whatever, and he offers them a drink. And then boom, they wake up hours later with no memory of the evening's events. You might think that it'd be those with clear ideas or suspicions that'd be the first to raise the alarm, but in reality, the opposite is true. The more of an idea that they had of what happened, the more compartmentalizing went on, allowing our seemingly kind stranger to get away with his crimes for a long time. It wasn't until a dude went to a doctor, having no idea why he hurt so much, that the cops were even informed that something was going on campus. Then I don't know how, but they caught up with the guy, arrested him, and then the whole story was in the media within just a few days. The cops think this kindly stranger assaulted anywhere between 18 to 100 different assaults in the space of 2 years. And you read that right. 18 confirmed, 100 possible. And I heard almost a dozen were almost talked into testifying, but withdrew one by one in the run-up to the trial itself. Testifying would mean admitting what had happened to them, something that some guys just aren't willing to do. I guess that applies to both sexes, but it especially applies to men. I know that because I was one of those who withdrew. I figured if so many others were brave enough to say it out loud, I wouldn't need to. But that's not how it works. The kindly stranger who invited me into his dorm room that night got more than 500 years in prison on account of the 18 separate accounts that he was convicted of, plus a bunch of other crimes thrown in there too. It was good news to me. It meant facing up to what had happened to me, which honestly has been the single toughest thing I'd ever had to do. I've since worked with an organization called 1 in 6. Named so because statistically, 1 in 6 men will be intimately assaulted or violated at some point in their lives. But because of how little we talk about it, you think the number is much, much lower. Well, it's not. And if the issues I just discussed affects any of your viewers, I strongly advise them to go visit www.oneinsix.org. There's a lot of advice and information there. Just don't close yourselves off and suffer in silence, because silence is the real killer. So back when I was in college here in Germany, me and a few friends of mine were invited to a house party one weekend. It wasn't sold as being some crazy all-night rave or anything like that, but since the drinking age is much lower than in the US, there'd been a lot of beer, and it was certain to get pretty wild. In light of that, me and my friends were really excited. We knew that they were going to be girls, and being the young single guys that we were, we knew it would be a great place to meet some potential dates and, do some flirting. We arrived stinking of cologne, wearing terrible button-up shirts with our beer in tow, and then we set up in the corner and just sort of awkwardly were drinking amongst ourselves for a while. But then the more we drank, the more confident we got, and slowly but surely we started to mingle. One of my friends started putting it on with a few different girls, and at first it was funny to watch him struggle. He was our designated driver for the evening meeting, but he hadn't been drinking and was therefore still very nervous and pretty clumsy. But then, we saw that the attraction to one of the girls was very much reciprocated. We were happy for him, but as much as I'd like to tell you that we were mature and gave him some space, that wasn't the case at all. We kept harassing him as a potential date, playfully of course, but it was still unwelcome. Eventually he told us to leave them alone because we were ruining his chances with her, and only then did we finally respect his wishes and just leave him in peace. We were pretty drunk by that period, so we just went off and entertained ourselves so he could get some space. Now a little time goes by and we start wondering where our sober friend and his lady are. We looked around everywhere for them, checking all of the bedrooms in the house, but all were occupied with people drinking or smoking, and our friend seemed to be nowhere to be seen. And then, in the process of looking for him, we found the girl's friends, and after asking where the new couple was, we discovered that they'd gone out to my friend's car for some alone time together. We knew exactly what they were up to, and although the girl's friends made us promise to leave them alone, we just had to get a picture or two for posterity, being immature and whatnot, you know the deal. I fully admit that our plan made us total a-holes, and that violating someone's intimate privacy is not only wrong, but also completely against the law, to be honest, and we didn't end up taking pictures or video of anyone that night, as you'll soon come to learn. In order to maintain the element of stealth, only one of us would creep up towards my friend's car before secretly recording whatever was going on inside. That was the plan, at least. And that person wasn't me, so the rest of us sort of held back at the party to make it look like we weren't doing exactly what it is we were doing. We talked to the girl's friends, kept them occupied, trying and failing to flirt with them until we started to grow impatient. All our friend with the phone had to do was run up to the car, snap a few pictures, and then run back with his prize. But longer and longer went by, and there was no sign of our friend with the camera phone. Unable to wait longer, I went outside to look for him, but instead of secretly filming our friend and his girl in the car, I found him sitting on the curb with no car in sight. He was on the phone with someone, so I figured shutting up and listening would get more answers than asking questions he wouldn't respond to. As I listened, I worked out the call was obviously a serious one by the end of it. I was almost certain that, number one, he'd been crying, and number two, that the call sounded like it had been with the police. I asked him where our friend with the car was, and he just shook his head and told me, "You need to leave." When he looked up at me, it became clear that yes, he had been crying, but why? He didn't tell me until we took a taxi back to his apartment, and over a few more beers and some cigarettes, he told me what happened. He tried to take some pictures as planned, but when he got to our friend's car, he found him in the passenger seat alone. His head was in his hands, and he was in this terrible state with tears streaming down his face. My friend with the phone kept asking, "What happened with the girl?" over and over, but our friend with the car wouldn't say anything. Wouldn't or couldn't, I don't know. But my phone friend walks around to the passenger side to climb in and talk to him with some privacy, and he asks again, "What happened?" And our friend with the car just points to the back seat. And that's when he realizes that our friend isn't alone in the car. He never was. And under the blanket on the back seat, he recognized the shape of a person. It was the girl that he'd been with, and she wasn't breathing. But when my friend with the phone asked what had happened, car friend just kept saying, I don't know. At first, he maybe thought that the girl had had a seizure or maybe a freak heart failure, and he kept saying to call 112, which is the emergency number here in Germany for fire or medical. But my friend with the car, he wouldn't call. He kept saying things like, "Just wait a minute, I need to think," and other things to delay my other friend. My friend with the phone said that he jumped out of the car out of instinct, realizing that he was getting his DNA and all of those things on what was now the scene of the crime, being very paranoid. There was no other reason why he would refuse to call the emergency number or try to delay in any way, or why he'd covered her body instead of just running to get help, or maybe even trying to get her out. My friend with the phone then told the other to get out of his car, but he wouldn't. He just suddenly started the engine and drove off before my friend could stop him. He then was faced with a choice: run or get us, which is what he really wanted to do because he was completely freaked out, or do the right thing, be a man and just call the 110 number instead, which is not the number for medical, it's the number for the police. He later discovered that the friend with the car had somehow suffocated this girl, although we never found out exactly how. He planned to drive into the River Main to take his own life and hide what he'd done, but he couldn't go through with it, and was found by the police and subsequently arrested. He pled guilty to everything to try and get as little time in prison as possible, and for a while it was a big story. But now for most people it's half a forgotten memory, really. When I recall it, my mind always seemed to land on one specific thing my friend said when he was in his apartment afterwards. He said realizing that he sat in the car with a dead body, as well as the killer themselves, was the scariest feeling he'd ever felt. It's the kind of moment that would top anybody's list of their life's scariest moments. But he said that just seconds later he was faced with something that was somehow even more terrifying to him. He was terrified that one of the dead girl's friends was going to ask him where she was, and now he wouldn't be able to tell her. I just tried to be the best friend I could to him, and get him away from the party before his worst fear came true. But I also understand how selfish it was of us not to warn anyone what had happened. Those girls might have carried on partying for a while, not knowing that one of their close friends was gone forever.
This is something that happened during my freshman year of college. It was a few years ago now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. At the time, I went to a university with about 10,000 students. For my first year, I lived in an all-female dorm building on the 3rd floor. There were 4 floors total, and I had my own dorm room all to myself. On probably the 3rd or 4th week of school.
How's it a year?
Just like any other. It was a weeknight, but I don't remember exactly what day. I woke up though at around 3 o'clock in the morning and really had to use the bathroom. The bathrooms were just a ways down the hallway, so I got out of bed and headed to the door.
That's the guy.
When I went into the hallway, it was empty and things were very quiet. I had to walk maybe between 50 and 100 feet to get to the bathroom. Once I was there, the bathroom that we had was basically a room with 5 doors and a sink. Each door was its own little private bathroom. Nobody was inside, and all the doors were open when we got there. Not surprisingly,
Super easy.
as I was inside one of the rooms, I heard footsteps come from the hallway. Whoever it was then entered the bathroom and went into one of the rooms across from me. I didn't think too much of it. I was inside for maybe a minute and then left. When I did, the other person was still inside the room across from me. Basically, right when I got back into the hallway, I heard the other bathroom door open. Then, when I was maybe 30 feet away from the bathroom, walking to my room, I heard them start walking in the hallway behind me. I still didn't think much of it at the time, and I expected it to be another girl. But something about it just seemed odd. I don't really know why. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was, but when I did, I saw that it was a man. And it wasn't a college-age man either. This guy looked much older than me. I was really confused by this. I turned back and kept walking to my room, but instantly I heard the man speed up his steps. He was walking pretty fast and starting to gain on me. I got a really bad feeling when I sped up as well. By now, I was pretty close to my door, and I hadn't locked it with me only going to the bathroom. That was good, meaning I could get inside faster. I could hear the man still getting closer and closer to me, and I started to feel panic setting into my mind. Now, I was only about 10 feet away, and the guy was less than 20 feet behind me. When I got to the door, I quickly opened it, got inside, and then shut the door and locked it behind me. Probably a second later, the guy stopped right outside my door. He then tried opening the door, and my heart started racing even faster than it already was. and he knocked on it. I had no clue who this guy was or what he wanted. I knew that he wasn't supposed to be here though. I chose not to answer the door. I also didn't bother to ask him what he was doing or who he was. It was about 30 seconds of silence after he knocked. I was hoping that he would have gone away, but then he knocked on the door again. It wasn't a very loud knock at all, and after he knocked, I walked over to the door and looked through the people. He was sort of short and wearing a black jacket and had sort of blonde hair. I didn't know who
Perfect.
he definitely didn't work at the school or anything either. He knocked again for a third time. I really wanted him to just go away. There was no way that I was going to be able to get any sleep with this guy here. He didn't say anything the entire time, but was just standing there. I went away from the door and sat on my bed. I waited, and the guy didn't knock for a really long time. But when I went back over to the door and looked out, thinking maybe he was gone, the guy was still there. I didn't know what to do.
Aha.
I walked back over to my bed. Then the guy knocked one more time. It was really quiet, and I just barely heard it because of how quiet it was. I didn't get up to look. I stayed where I was, and probably 10 more minutes went by. I didn't hear any noises and got up to look again. That's when I saw that the guy was finally gone. After that, I was finally able to get back to sleep. The next morning, I found my resident advisor and told her about the man. She said that she was going to report it. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. A few days later, though, I found out that the man had been let into the building much earlier that night. He had told a student that his daughter lived there and he had to give her something. The student let him in believing his story. It turned out that it was a complete lie, and he must have hid somewhere for hours. I get really creeped out thinking about it. Campus security was informed of the situation, but I never heard anything more of it. In the fall of 2019, I was a freshman in college. I went to a smaller school and I lived in the dorms. I had a roommate named Danny. He was a real jerk. But that's not the horror story. Sure, it was annoying to be in that small dorm room with Danny.
Aha.
And pestered me on purpose a lot of times. Because of this, I tried to spend as much time away from my dorm room as possible. I would do all my studying in different places around campus. Spots to sit and get work done were everywhere, in just about every building. Even if I wasn't doing homework, I could sit and watch YouTube videos or whatever. I preferred it to being in my dorm room if Danny was there. I got into a routine with this after probably the first month. So one night, I remembered that I was doing homework in this one building. The building had a lot of our classrooms here and had several different subjects. There were about 4 floors here, and I was up on the 3rd or 4th floor, but I don't remember which one. I was in a comfortable chair that had a table attached to it. It was built for studying and stuff. There were a few of these types of chairs that looked out a window that had a nice view of campus. I took a break at about 6 p.m. and went to the dining hall to eat. I met up with a friend there, and then afterwards went back to the same
Do
building.
do 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 do.
By now, especially if I'm on the top floor, things were very quiet, and nobody else was really around. I kept working, and was there until probably like 9 p.m. As I worked, I had my headphones in, and played some music in the background.
Do do do
Sometimes I
do
would
do
read,
do.
and sometimes I wouldn't.
Do 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 do.
So right after I was done,
Shitty do, dirty shit. That's not good.
behind me immediately,
Do 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 do. Do 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 do.
footsteps were coming from the hallway with some classrooms. I started picking up my laptop.
Oh my.
As I did, the footsteps got closer and closer.
Okay, good.
It didn't seem like the person was going to walk by me though. It almost
Good,
seemed
good,
like
good.
it was closer instead. I turned around to look and see who it was. All I saw though was somebody ducking around a corner behind a beam. I didn't get a look at the person, but just saw part of them for like a second. This was kind of weird. I finished putting my things in my backpack and then stood up, looking to where I saw the person again.
And chaos
I still saw nothing.
is a
I
ruin.
walked over to the stairs and left the building. I went back to my dorm after that.
Something chaos is a
The very
ruin.
next day, there was a similar experience. This time, after studying in a different building, I went to the Performing Arts building to study that night. This building is almost always pretty quiet. There were much less classrooms inside of it, and unless there was a concert or something going on, not many people would be there. I I studied in peace for basically the whole time and saw only about
No, exactly where to go.
walking by the entire time that I was in there. For the last 2 hours probably, I saw nobody at all. The location that I was studying
No.
was on the first floor and next to a staircase where there was a table and chair set up
It
for studying.
is the right one, but it's not the right one.
Kind of out of the way, but there was a hallway going past and another one that connected. I did not have my headphones in this time and could hear everything around me. Things were very quiet, and it soon got to be kind of late. At one point, though, I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. Just when these footsteps were about to get into my view, though, they stopped. It was like just around the corner where I couldn't see. There was no room to out the door right there either. It was like the person had just stopped in their tracks. If they went back the other way or moved at all, I would have heard them. What were they doing? Were they just standing there? I had no idea.
Okay.
I decided to pack up my stuff and head back to my dorm. When I did,
Royal Entry, great game.
luckily for me, I did not have
Believe this is the right
to
one?
hallway, and I would be going the other way.
When I say believe, I'm
When
sure.
I left, as soon as I started heading down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they followed me, but were still out of my sight. Then I heard them start to get closer and within my view. I turned around to see who it was that was there. I did it very quickly to not be weird, so I didn't get a good look at the person. But I did see them. There was a tall and thin-looking guy
One,
walking
shoot,
a little bit
shoot.
back behind me. It seemed as though he was walking pretty fast. It was way too weird, and as I walked, I passed by an exit door. It wasn't one of the main entrances or exits to the building, but at the last moment, I turned and I left. Once I was out of there, I headed back to the main area of campus. The guy didn't leave the building, whoever it was. I wondered if this was
God damn it.
the person who had been there the previous night. I went back to my dorm, and after that, decided to take a break from studying on campus at night. As much as I didn't like to study in my dorm room with Danny, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But the story doesn't quite end there. A few days
Fuck.
later, I had classes like normal and was gone for most of the day. I returned to our dorm in the late afternoon, and Danny was there. When I got into the dorm, he told me to send me a comeback if he asked for it. Apparently, he knocked on my door, and was
I'm itching.
a guy asked if I was there. I asked Danny what the guy looked like, and he said tall and thin, and basically described the same guy that I had seen the other night.
Okay, looks good.
He didn't say that. Apparently, he just walked away. After that, I never saw the man again.
The event in question happened during my sophomore year in college, back in 2012. I also can't remember the exact month, but it was sometime during the winter. At the time, I lived with two roommates, Katie and Danielle. We were the best buds of all time. We had just moved into our first
Ouch.
and we were reveling in hanging out of the dorms. With this turn of events came some experimentation.
My sack itch. My ball sack is itching.
Who eventually got into harder drugs, like cocaine and Molly, etc. Katie and I decided after a while that all of this partying was jeopardizing our health and our schoolwork, so we backed off on the drugs. Danielle, however, decided to continue experimenting and became more aggressive. I should note that I hold no judgment of drug use whatsoever, but I include because I believe it may be a crucial component of the events that followed. The saga started on a weekend. We all decided to go to a party one night and got separated from each other. I had made arrangements to leave the party early, so Danielle agreed to walk with Caddy back to the house. We were always adamant about the buddy system at night. However, on that night, it failed. Danielle left the party with someone, leaving Katie to walk home by herself. She was unfortunately followed by a strange man. To this day, I deeply regret leaving that night, but I've come to terms with my past decision. I came home the next morning. Katie filled me in on the previous night. She was very upset, which was out of character for her. She told me that she had texted Danielle at some point during the night, telling her that she was very bummed out about having to walk home alone. Katie was frustrated, and her text was blunt, but Caddy and I just figured that Danielle would either brush it off or apologize, and things would move on. That
did not happen. Danielle flipped her shit and became completely enraged. She responded very defensively and told Katie in very colorful terms to basically fuck off and get over it. We thought it was pretty odd and hostile, but tried to just carry on with our lives and not overthink it. It was a Monday, so Katie left the house to go to work on campus, and I went to my afternoon lecture. Sometime while I was in class, Danielle came into Katie's workplace in the student rec center and began screaming at her in front of 60 plus patrons, calling her all kinds of obscenities. She was escorted out of the building by security and somehow made her way back to our house. I should also note that Danielle's mother was visiting this week and was with her the entire time. I believe she was terrified of her daughter, which is why she never intervened. By the time she arrived at home, I had returned from class and was making food in the kitchen. At this juncture, Danielle's rage was centered on Katie, not me. I tried to let the two of them work it out without my intervention, but Danielle cornered me in the kitchen and told me how angry she was with Katie. I have never seen rage in someone's eyes like that. I refused to engage with her and retreated to my room in the back of the house. I sat on my bed and took some deep breaths. That's when I heard Katie coming up the side yard. She was crying on the phone with her mom, telling her what had just taken place at work. I immediately felt this horrible pit in my stomach, as I knew they were about to confront each other again. The door opened, and Katie walked in. I was still in my room when I heard them start yelling at each other. Katie stood up for herself, telling Danielle that she was way out of line, and Danny retorted with more obscenities. The yelling turned into full-on screaming, and I had finally had enough. So I went into the living room where they were arguing. Danielle's mom was there as well. I told Danny to knock it off and leave, to which he told me to go myself. This gave Katie time to try to vault into her room, but Danny followed her and slammed Katie's hand in the door as she was trying to barricade herself. Things had gotten way out of hand. I went outside on our front porch, and Katie followed me outside. A few seconds later, we heard Danny's mom screaming for her to put something down. We looked at each other in terror. I told Katie to run away and to call 911. At that moment, Danny flings open the front door, holding a giant kitchen knife raised above her head, and screaming at the top of her lungs at Katie, saying that she was going to kill her. By this time, all of our neighbors were standing outside, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I'm not a very confrontational person, but why hell was I going to let someone kill my best friend? So in a split-second decision, I lunged at Danny, and somehow managed to get the knife away from her, and threw it on the front lawn. I ran to grab it, at which time, Danielle had gone back inside to grab another knife. This time, she turned it on herself, and asked me if I wanted to watch her end it all. Something had gone terribly wrong with Danielle. Her mother was hysterical by this point, and I kept pleading for her to stop. I then blacked out. When I came to, I was running down the street with Katie. We soon took refuge at our neighbor's house. All the while we could still hear Danielle's blood-curdling screams down the street. We were totally shell-shocked, but grateful to our neighbors for helping us out until the police came. We saw the cops show up a short time later, along with a crisis unit. They detained Danny and drove her to the hospital, where she was put on a psychiatric evaluation. Katie and I never saw Danielle again, and we stayed with some mutual friends for a couple of weeks before returning to that house. We moved out at the end of that year, as the place harbored too many bad memories for us. I later learned that Danielle had experienced a psychotic break triggered by a variety of factors, including stress, drug use, and an underlying mental health condition. This was a huge eye-opener for me to further educate myself about mental health in young adults, as well as appreciate the incredible things your body can do while you're in fight or flight mode. It's also taught me a lesson to trust my gut more, as my spidey senses had warned me about Danielle before, but I ignored it. This is somewhat of a convoluted story, so please bear with me as I try to convey everything that I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my former housemate could have potentially been a serial killer, or one in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances my housemate Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd. But I really needed a place to stay, and everyone has their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike more, I learned about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He is probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job and enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house, drinking and using, he would start to run off at the mouth. If I smelled lye coming from the basement, to not think anything of it. It was probably the third time he said this that I asked him why he kept saying that. He responds with, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a creepy grin on his face. I tried to chalk it up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know about my coming and going, and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work, because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging, and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. On other days, he would play very loud music that bumped through the entire house. Sometimes he would even play NPR talk radio at very high volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death, and nobody cares." I took exception to this, telling him that I thought that was messed up. When he would get to tweaking, he would always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about he was a normal guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I think he has gone too far to simply be joking. I was in a weird position. Money was tight at the time, and I didn't have very many options. I tried to convince myself that even if he was messed up, he probably was just engaging in some outward fantasism. I knew that he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion. But
Good.
I don't judge that kind of activity at face value, but I was becoming concerned. One day when I was doing laundry, I caught a whiff of decomposition.
Beautiful.
The house we were in was in southeast Portland and was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York,
Such a good
I
song.
know that animals can sometimes be trapped in the walls and die. But this was in the garage. There were no animals scurrying about. This was both strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what to do, and decided that I would confront him about the smell. I
Sorry.
posed the question in a somewhat suggestive way by expanding
Do,
on
do.
his jokes.
Do,
I
do,
told
do,
him
do,
that he needs to do a
do,
better
do.
job of cleaning up the bodies,
Do, do, do,
because
do,
I could
do,
smell the
do.
decomposition from the garage.
Pardon, si je peux vous déranger, je me présente comme candidate indépendante.
C'est gentil, merci.
Malgré ce qu'on en dit, le pouvoir n'est pas accessible à tous.
On se dit fièrement que nous vivons en réalité de la population, elle décide qui décide pour elle.
Lorsque j'ai compris qu'il y avait pas la possibilité d'exprimer un refus, j'ai été un peu scandalisé.
Si la course est perdue d'avance pour la majorité des coureurs, c'est que nous sommes les perdants du jeu électoral.
Bon. Sounds delightful.
Were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave him some excuse about having to go somewhere, packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and quickly left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way inside was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect to either confirm or dismiss my suspicions once and for all.
Okay.
In the last couple of months of living there, I was subjected to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence, and he was also using more and more. He once showed me a video he made, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with sounds of distorted screaming, and this strange, leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of those things by themselves may be innocuous, but as they accumulated together, they became a disturbing piece of art. It was October of 2016 that I finally left there, taking off to a Native American reservation for a pipeline protest. There were mixed feelings of a call to action and wanting to get out of that house any way I could. I gave him notice that I was leaving. My last night there, he was drinking and tweaking again, and eventually started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and sexual violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. You know they're gonna catch you eventually, I said, not holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person that the police would ever suspect, and asserted that they would never catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense altogether. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year, then a year and a half. It felt as though I hadn't done anything, and the guilt was eating away at me. So I called the Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold, because the phone call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center. So they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, the house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they had taken an interest. I gave them as much information as I could, and left it at that, feeling just a bit better that I at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times. I told my mother all about this, and she became very interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on Google Maps and put it up on Street View. I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer sitting in the driveway that wasn't there before. I could provide a few theories as to why it might be there, but cannot put together a practical reason for it. Admittedly, this is pure conjecture, but I can't help but wonder. I doubt that I will ever get closure, or have my suspicions validated, unless he finally gets caught and arrested. I have interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my life, but none of them have ever left this kind of impression on me. Make of this what you will, but I hope I never see him again. This happened over the course of a year, when I was between 15 and 16. I'm 20 years old now, and it's only been recently revealed to me just how messed up the situation really was. I was obviously still living at home at the time, but my sister, who is 7 years older than me, had moved out and was living with her now husband, his high school best friend, and some other guy who they met through one of those find a roommate sites.
Find a roommate?
A reclusive, nerdy type who preferred hiding in his room watching Star Trek and playing computer games. rather than hanging out with the other roommates. And the only person
Nope.
he ever really seemed to want to be around was his similarly shy and nerdy girlfriend. For a bit of context to the story, when this happened he was 28 and she was 24. They were both a bit weird, but initially seemed entirely harmless. For the sake of the story, I'll refer to the normal roommate as Frank, the strange roommate as William, and his equally strange girlfriend as Amber. Now, my sister and I have never really had the best relationship with our parents, and at this point things were especially rocky. Our mother was dating a guy who was, to put it kindly, an abusive sack of shit who seemingly hated me and would find any
Nice.
excuse to go off on me. As a result, I spent a lot of time over at my sister's place. It was around this time that William and Amber started to get very strange. As I mentioned earlier, the two of them were always kind of odd. They only ever seemed to want to talk to each other, and would even go as far as to ignore anyone else who tried to speak to them. Amber was far worse than William in this regard. He would at least give you brief responses most of the time. Amber had a creepy habit of just blankly staring at you for a couple of seconds, then walking away if you asked her a question, or tried to engage in conversation at all. That wasn't the strangest thing though. When I would stay over, I would sleep on a futon in Frank's office, which was on the ground floor. It happened to be next to the downstairs bathroom, which for some reason, Amber preferred using to the one upstairs. She would take long showers in the middle of the night, which was whatever. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, so I generally slept right through them. One night, however, I stayed up super late doing some revisions to my homework. I happened to be awake when she finished one of her late showers. I was too absorbed in my task to really pay attention to anything else, but I definitely noted hearing the shower shut off because it was an indicator of how late it really was. Approximately 10 minutes later, I look up from my laptop, and there she was. I always kept the door open just a crack, because that room tended to get unbearably hot if I didn't. Amber was just standing there, outside the room, completely naked, watching me through the open crack in the door. I said her name and asked if she was okay, which seemingly startled her, because she then walked away pretty quickly. I convinced myself that in my over-caffeinated, sleep-deprived state, I just imagined the whole thing, and I didn't mention it to anyone. Fast forward around a month later, I head over to my sister's place one night to find Frank a bit agitated about what he perceives to be a peeping Tom problem. He found fingerprints on the outside of his office window in such a way that it implied someone had been pressing up against the glass and looking in. The blinds in this room were slightly too small for the window, so you could see in from the outside, and the room was in the front of the house, with the window easily accessible from the street. He was concerned that some random passing pervert had been spying on him while he was having a private moment in his office, or some potential burglar had been sizing up the joint. The police were called, but since he didn't have any external CCTV at this point, no evidence could be provided, and ultimately, nothing could be done. Soon after, Frank installed both internal and external cameras on the house. This was installed while William and his girlfriend were away on holiday, and I guess everyone had forgotten to tell them about it. A couple of months later, I went to my sister's to find that William's room was empty, and was informed that he had moved out. Of course, I asked why, and I was told that he and Amber were a pair of fucking creeps, and the others had collectively decided to kick them out. Apparently, Amber watching me through the office door was not a one-time incident. The security footage revealed that she did this frequently, sometimes for as long as 20 to 30 minutes. I was just usually asleep when she was doing it. Not only that, but the fingerprints on the window had apparently been from William standing outside watching me after I had showered and was hanging out in just a towel. which was a less regular occurrence, but apparently was caught on camera enough times for it to be concerning. As if this wasn't creepy enough, I was recently hanging out with my sister and her husband. He made a comment about how he wished they would have told me the entire story at the time, so that I could have pressed charges. I asked him what he meant by that, and he explained that not only had they been secretly watching me, but the footage also showed they had messed with food and stuff that I brought over, depicting William licking all of my apples, and Amber spitting into my orange juice, even dumping regular cow's milk into my lactose-free stuff, which explains why I had a period of feeling sick out of nowhere. Apparently, when Frank barged into their room to confront them about it, he not only found several shirts I thought I had misplaced were stolen by them, but they literally hung them up on the wall, along with several drawings of me sleeping and poems about me, whose contents I don't know and really don't want to know. After seeing this, Frank gave them an ultimatum. You have 2 hours to get the f out of this house and never contact any of us again, or I'm calling the police. They took the former option, but I still feel sick thinking of what they were potentially planning for me.
I used to work at a center in the United States, and the scariest thing that ever happened to me there was also the single most terrifying thing that's ever
Whoa.
What was on the counter, then told the cops everything I knew. It obviously wasn't all that much, but as I was talking to them, I noticed a few more police surrounding the car.
I've got to check the video.
Still had the door open. I called the store manager from the McDonald's across the street. The cops had to close the store after the crime scene.
Mario entry.
See what was going on, even though it was their day off, and after telling them what had happened,
Green chest.
decompress. From what I heard later, the guy had gotten into an argument with his wife while out driving somewhere. Then at some point, he'd snapped, pulled up into a parking lot, stabbed her to death, then cut her tongue out. Then, for some reason, he picked our 7-Eleven to walk into to slam the tongue he'd cut out of her mouth down onto the counter.
Did they ruin another one?
Royal Tiger Towel. L'essuie-tout fort en tigre. Le beurre végétal sans produits laitiers Becel ne sort pas de la vache, mais est-il bon en cuisine? Is it good for cooking? Yes. Look at...
Shake the image of that bloody tongue just lying on the countertop right in front of me. The thing I just can't seem to shake is that it wasn't enough for the guy to actually stab and kill his own wife. He had to reach into her mouth afterwards and cut her tongue out. How completely insane with fury. Like what to do something.
Okay, shout out to the guy.
Customers in the early afternoon.
I don't know what to do. Okay, I don't know what to do.
Served 2 guys for coffee and smokes, and at the back of the line, there's this kid, no older than maybe 11 or 12, just waiting there patiently with a backpack in his hand.
We'll do 2 more trophies and that's
I
it.
thought he would look kind of cute, like a little gentleman out doing some grocery shopping for his mom or something. He gets to the front of the line and I ask him, "What can I help you with, sir?" In a kind of jokey, playful way. Without a hint of emotion on his face, he just reaches into his backpack, pulls out a gun, and says, "Give me all the money." When he pointed at me, I wasn't sure if it was real or not, because where the hell would a 12-year-old kid get their hands on a loaded gun?
Gee, tired a little bit.
7-Eleven I work at is in some high crime area or whatever. It's actually located in a pretty nice place, and although I've heard 1 or 2 stories from coworkers about the trouble at the store, nothing had ever happened to me personally. There was one guy at the store at the time, and I looked over at him to see him kind of smiling at the kid. Smiling and frowning, like he was amused and disapproved of playing some dumb childish prank.
Okay, and you're gonna be here.
I figured this guy
I trust
so
you.
I tried calling this kid's bluff and asked him something like, "You shouldn't point toys like that, sweetie. It's real." The kid responds by cocking the gun, and it has this real metallic sound that sends this kind of shock of fear running through me. I didn't know of any toy guns that made such a realistic sound, and as if to illustrate that he wasn't joking around, the kid held the gun in the air and actually fired a shot that went right over my head. After my ears got done ringing, and I came to, I heard, "Give me all the money," in the same monotone, emotionless way, and I didn't hesitate in doing what he asked. I put as much cash as I could onto the countertop and watched him fill his backpack with it before he just walked out of the store. I think the thing that scared me so much about it was that the kid just didn't seem to realize the gravity of the situation. He definitely seemed like he had something missing about him. Like he didn't understand that he could have actually killed someone over whatever dumb thing he wanted to buy with that money, be it video games or candy or whatever.
Okay, that's actually pretty good.
At least a grown-up armed robber understands that the gun is just a means of getting what he wanted, and it's not a good idea to fire it or whatever, just in case they accidentally shoot someone in the face. I get the feeling that even if I'd even tried to resist or tell the kid no, he'd have just shot me, because it's what he assumed he should do. It's almost surreal to me. Now the closest I've ever been was at the hands of a child. Someone who should have been so innocent and carefree and full of love, but instead just felt nothing. Going back almost 10 years ago now, but one morning I dropped my son off at school and then drove over to a nearby 7-Eleven with my infant daughter.
Infant daughter.
So there were only one or two other customers.
The thing you learn.
And one of them was this older-looking guy with a walker who was slowly
Lucky.
making his way around the store. I didn't pay him too much attention other than feeling kind of sorry for him. Then I picked up the few items I needed and headed out to my car. Right as I'm putting my
Two
car
more?
in the car seat, I hear a voice behind me. I turned, and it's the old man with the walker.
We will be at the exact same place we were before.
And then when I saw him in the 7-Eleven, he was walking upright, not leaning on the walker, and his voice sounded much younger than you would have expected from just looking at him. I remember all he said was, "Cute kid." Then as I turned around, I only got the slightest look at the guy and his brand new posture before it slammed the walker into the back of my legs. The force made my knees buckle, and I almost fell right on top of my young daughter. I'm not exactly the tallest woman in the world, so the height reduction from my knees buckling had me falling forward into my open car door, and I had really tried not to crush her as I fell. I honestly thought that he was trying to get me, which was bad enough. But when he grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me up and off of my daughter, I realized he was trying to get to her instead. I honestly didn't think that I could get any more terrified, but the realization that he was actually trying to take my infant daughter away from me was just too much to bear. I remember letting out the loudest, most ear-splitting scream I've ever let out in my life, begging him not to take my baby. He was so much stronger and faster than he looked.
Fuck, I'm fucked if I cannot do this.
Fiendish scheme to have everyone let their guards down around him. It honestly seems like divine intervention now that I look back at it. But someone was just pulling into the small parking lot just as he almost had a hand on my daughter. And seeing the struggle had them instinctively honking their horn over and over in a bid to break it up. I think they figured it was just an incident of spousal abuse or something because they were just honking and didn't get out of their car until I screamed over and over again, "He's trying to take my baby." The moment they heard that, they came bursting into the driver's side door. But then the guy sprinted past the passenger side and out towards the main highway. The second he did, another car comes speeding up and stops by him, which I first thought might have been another person coming to tackle him or something. But instead, the guy climbs into the second car and speeds off with a screech of his tires. What horrified me in the aftermath was that it was quite clearly a well-planned and almost perfectly executed attempt to kidnap my daughter.
Super simple.
Surprised in the previous occasion. After the kind stranger calmed me down, they helped me call the cops as I tried my best to calm my daughter down in turn. She was still too young. She picked up on my distress enough to leave wailing
Spell and
and
staff.
her off to sleep. The cops who arrived at the 7-Eleven a short while after said that they'd never heard of such a thing happening there before, but they were able to check the street cameras outside the 7-Eleven to try and get a clear image of the getaway car's number plate. I stuck around long enough to find out that the car's plates came back as stolen, and the cop I spoke to said that there was a good chance that they just ditched the vehicle somewhere after wiping it down for printing. If they had already put this operation out, there was a good chance they planned for that too. The only saving grace was that the officer assured me that my report was a step towards catching them. A small step, but a step nonetheless. The horrifying experience I went through that morning wasn't for nothing, as not only did the cops now have a description of the guy who tried to do the kidnapping, but the failure to kidnap my daughter meant that they'd probably hesitate before trying the same plan again. I took a lot of comfort in that idea, and if it wasn't for the cop taking the time to reassure me of that, I don't think I'd have dealt with the trauma of it as half as well as I did in the months that followed. But I did a lot of praying too. Desperate prayers that whoever had planned such a horrible kidnapping would never, ever be successful.
Tired.
And that no one else would have to endure the pure horror that I had.
I love you.
During a time when I was done with college and wasn't able to find a job right away, I took a job at a 7-Eleven because I needed money. I worked mostly late night and overnight shifts. What I liked about this was that there wasn't many people that came in, and I would have a lot of free time by myself to play on my phone or listen to podcasts. I was always a night owl, but I didn't really like staying up all night when I would have
Doing that in Seabiscuit.
about 2 months. But one night, I was working by myself very late. It was probably 2 or 3 o'clock,
Come on, Ink.
but I don't remember the exact time. The location that our 7-Eleven is at is on a road just
Wanna do
off the
another 10 minutes? Okay.
and we're really busy during the day.
Fucking
Not so
fire.
much at night. We got several customers early on, and for the first few hours, I had quite a bit to do actually. But now, we would get only like one person every 20 minutes or so, and I started to get bored. I noticed in the back corner of the store where we had a soda machine and icing machines, there was a spill on the floor. Seeing as though we didn't have any customers, I decided to go over and mop it up. I left the counter and walked over to the back near the bathrooms where they kept them up.
Trying to kill him.
The corner where the spill was. I saw the spill. Looked like Coca-Cola. Thankfully, the floor hadn't gotten all gross and sticky yet, and the mop was working well. As I was mopping, I suddenly heard the sound of the front door opening, and somebody walked inside. Realizing I wasn't at my counter, I rested the mop against the wall and looked over to see who had entered our store. Where I was, you couldn't see the front door, and whoever was in the front door couldn't see me either. I could, however, just see the front counter. I saw somebody standing at the front counter with their back to me. They seemed to be looking around as though they were looking for someone who worked there. Realizing I needed to go back there, I took a couple of steps over to them, and as I did, I noticed them turn, and their head went to the side. They hadn't noticed me, but I did see them looking to the side, revealing that they were wearing some sort of mask. It appeared to be a really creepy-looking clown mask. I then noticed he was wearing a dark blue jacket, and his right hand was in his pocket. Immediately I got a bad feeling, as if he was up to no good, and possibly looking to rob the place. I froze in place, telling myself to stop being scared for no reason, and to just go. I thought, what are the odds he's trying to rob the store? It had never happened before. But as I was standing there, I watched the man then go around and behind the counter himself. As a pure reaction to this, I jumped behind the nearest aisle and hid. I could hear the man messing with stuff behind the counter. It sounded like he was going through the cash register. I figured he was in fact robbing the place, and as I was hiding back there, I decided to call the police. I got out my phone and dialed. The operator answered the phone. I suddenly heard the man go quiet from whatever he was doing and say something. Out of fear, I quickly hung up the phone and held my breath. I heard the man shout from behind the counter, asking who was inside and to come out now. He spoke in a loud and demanding tone. I wasn't going to go. I was way too scared to move. At this point, I just wanted to get out of there. I knew our store was being robbed, but they didn't pay me enough to try to stop this guy. I just wanted to call the police again, but obviously the man could hear me if I did. I heard his footsteps moving out from behind the counter and get a little bit closer to me. But then they stopped, and I didn't hear anything. I was not moving a muscle, and I was being as quiet as I possibly could be. Then, I heard the door to the building open and shut. I guessed that the guy was leaving, because I didn't hear anything else for about a minute after that. Finally, I got up and slowly took a few steps out. I still heard nothing, and knew this had to mean that the guy was gone. I walked over to the counter to examine what exactly the man had done, and how much he had took. When I got there, though, I passed by the front of the counter where I could see clearly outside. I saw that the man was standing right in front of the door, looking inside, with his creepy clown mask still on. I jumped back when I saw this, and the man started to walk inside.
Okay, last
I
one.
ran back towards the end of the store where I had hid before. I heard the man come in and shout
This game.
and stop hiding like a baby. His footsteps were fast approaching mine, and I knew I probably wouldn't be able to hide from him this time. I was ducking down and quietly moving through aisles to try to hide from the man. This continued for probably a minute, and I knew I couldn't keep this up for much longer.
Fuck.
I could hear where the man was, but suddenly, I heard the man yell a curse word, and then run back to the front and leave the building again. I was confused, but this time decided to stay hiding. Out of curiosity, though, took a quick peek outside. This time, I saw a police car in the parking lot, and it turned its flashing lights on as I saw another car starting to drive away. I stayed hidden until I saw the police stopping the man, and I knew it was safe. I guess my call to the police had gone through, even though I hadn't been able to speak with them. Luckily, the man was caught, and after this night, I decided I didn't want to work overnights again. I still worked there for another 2 months, even working late shifts, but didn't have to work by myself again.
So this happened yesterday, and I'm still pretty shaken up. Just for some backstory, I'm a 25-year-old female, and my boyfriend and I both have jobs in an office. I was extremely tired yesterday morning, so I decided to work from home, as my boyfriend went into the office. So I was alone all day, with just my dog and cat at home with me. The day was normal as any other work day from home that I've taken, until about 1:30 p.m. This is where things took a turn. I had just hopped into a work meeting when my doorbell rang. We have one of those ring doorbells with a camera, and it notifies my boyfriend's phone that someone's at the door. I texted my boyfriend, and I asked if he could check who it was, and he said it was an older man who looked kind of sketchy and did not answer the door. So I ignore the door and go back to my meeting. 20 minutes later, I'm done with my meeting, and I decided to check my phone. I always keep my phone on Do Not Disturb while I'm working. And as soon as I checked it, I noticed all of the calls and texts that I missed from my boyfriend. And I immediately called him back, and he frantically asked me why I haven't been answering. I told him I was in a work meeting, and he tells me to look out the window, as the man hasn't left our property yet. I very quietly walk over to the front windows
I need to do
house
this.
and peek out. And sure enough, the man's in our driveway. He had parked his old beat-up truck
Holy
in our
fuck.
driveway, and he was looking back and forth very sketchily. He had on dirty jeans and a dirty gray tank top. I immediately run back to our bedroom, and at this point, my heart is pounding in my chest. I tried to comfort myself by just saying that maybe he had the wrong house. But no. The man began looking through our windows, trying to see inside, and he proceeded to try and open our back gate, which was locked.
Fuck.
As I mentioned earlier, I have a large dog, and at this point, my dog is snapping and growling at the front door. As I still had my boyfriend on the phone, and he was actively watching the man on the camera app on his phone, I asked him what I should do since I was in full panic mode and completely alone. Call 911, he firmly said. I did as he said, and with shaky hands I called.
While I waited for the police to arrive, I texted my mom to let her know of the situation, and she immediately dropped what she was doing and said she was on her way. The man was still snooping around the house and looking through our windows. At this point, I had no idea what his intentions were, but by the looks of it, they didn't seem good, and I was really afraid he would see me. As soon as the man saw the police coming down the road, he hopped in his truck and sped off. I ran outside with the officer, and at this point my mom had arrived as well. In tears, I explained what happened, and thankfully my mom got the man's license plate number. The police took his license plate number as well as description, and they told me they'd be on lookout for him. I know this may not seem as scary as some of the other stories here, but when you're alone and there's a man looking through your windows and not leaving your property, you have no idea what his intentions are, and it's absolutely terrifying. I wasn't able to sleep last night because I was so terrified.
Oh, we're good.
Trying to finish what he started. I'm hoping the police call me with an update since we have the license plate number, and if they do, I will provide an update. And to the strange man who wouldn't leave my property, please don't come back again. For context, I'm a girl, and the story took place when I was 18 years old. At the time, I was living with my father, but he was working long shifts away from home, so I spent a lot of time alone. One day I was home alone and trying to study in my bedroom.
Ouch.
It was around 7 p.m. and dark outside. I was used to studying alone like this.
Let's play a little bit more. I'm down for a little bit more.
House facing the garden, which has a gate at the back leading to a large field. It wasn't unusual to get distracted by the occasional noise at night, because the fields are really popular with dog walkers. This time, though, it was different. I was trying to focus on my homework when a
Fuck you.
came
What up?
shining through the window. I peeked out expecting to see a person in the dog, but I couldn't locate the source of the light. I went back to what I was doing, assuming it was someone walking who'd accidentally shone the light at my window. The next
Probably
night
too heavy.
happens again. A bright light through my window, specifically with no dog walker in sight. This time I was frustrated, and I questioned if it could be the same person being creepy or trying to see into my room as I kept the curtains open. I spent longer looking out the window this time, trying to figure
fucking
out the
don't
source of
care.
the light. I soon realized it was coming from somewhere close. It was coming from my own garden, and the gate connecting to the field seemed to be open. My heart started beating really fast, and I didn't know what to do. I quickly texted my dad, saying that I thought someone was in the garden. He told me to make sure that all of the doors were locked, and that he'd be home as soon as he could. I snuck down the stairs as quietly as possible, not wanting whoever was outside to know I was there. I checked the front door, and thank God it was locked. I crept to the back door facing the garden, and just as I was about to check it, I then saw the handle going down, like someone was trying to open the door. Thankfully that door was locked too, but they did try a few times to open it. By this point, I was absolutely terrified and shaking. I heard them try and pull at the kitchen window as well, but they had no luck. I tried to get a look at the person, but all I could tell was that they were white and tall. It was too dark to pick out any features. They seemed to be getting frustrated now, and then started banging at the window, like they wanted to force it to break or open. I looked towards the front of the house, and my dad's car still wasn't there, and I was getting worried. Then by some miracle, I heard my neighbor's back door open, and their large dog barking loudly. They must have noticed the stranger, and then let out their dogs to scare them away. And it worked. I haven't seen them around again. I've never been so thankful for my neighbor's loud dogs before, and now I always check the doors are locked, even more than I used to. This happened when I was 17. I'm 22 now, and still thinking about it haunts me to this day. I was at my house on a Friday night. My mother was out of town for the weekend visiting some friends, so I had the house all to myself for the weekend. That night, I invited my friend Dan over for the night, and we decided to watch a scary movie. We got some snacks and soda, and we then turned on my favorite horror movie of all time, which is Drag Me to Hell. The one where that loan officer denies an old woman's request for an extension on her mortgage, and she thinks it's a curse put on her, where she has to break it within 3 days, or she'll get literally dragged to hell. Anyways, about an hour into the movie, me and Dan were having a good time and laughing at random shit in the movie. I paused the movie because I had to go to the bathroom, and just as I walked into the bathroom, I saw out the window that the sky looked green. I knew that there was going to be a storm, but I didn't pay attention to it. So I did my business, washed up, and went to continue the movie. Well, after the movie was over, me and Dan got an alert on our phones. The alert said that there was going to be a tornado warning until 7:45 p.m. and to seek shelter now, and that the threat level was really extreme. We immediately left the house to get to the storm shelter in the trailer park. Yeah, I lived in a trailer park at the time, so we had to evacuate the trailer. Just as we got to the storm shelter, that was when all of the sirens started to go off, and the wind started to get violent. The owner of the trailer park unlocked the shelter, and us, and everyone else in the trailer park got inside of it. We went down to the basement and all huddled. About 10 minutes later, the power went out, and we could all hear the wind getting really violent, and what sounded like a freight train shook the whole building. It shook so violently that I actually thought it was going to collapse. I started crying, and I thought we were going to die. Me, Dan, and everyone else in the shelter started freaking out. There were 5 loud crashing sounds that came from outside. I was so terrified that I felt like I was going to shit myself. We then heard a loud roar of the tornado's wind from outside through the structure of the building. Then about 10 minutes of noise later, it stopped. We were then given the all clear. We all left the shelter, and from the damage we all saw, I couldn't believe it. To say the damage was crazy is an understatement. There were a few cars flipped upside down, a couple of trees were uprooted, and 3 houses were damaged. 2 others were completely leveled, and another house had a car crash into it. Me and Dan hugged each other tightly while crying hysterically, because we were really glad to be alive. We were probably doing this for about 15 minutes.
What the fuck?
Then we walked back to my house. Luckily, all it had was just a little bit of side damage. Dan also lived in the trailer park at the time. Dan's mom and sister said when they got back to their house, there was damage to the roof. I invited Dan to spend the night at my house tonight. He agreed since he was still terrified. His mom and sister were cool with it too. I know this isn't the typical story with a creeper, but it was still terrifying, and I will never forget that day.
When I was around 18, I had gotten let go from my job as a part-time retail associate in Iowa City, Iowa. The reason for my termination was because the company was going bankrupt and couldn't afford to pay their employees. At the time, my parents made me pay rent and other expenses, and because I no longer had a job, I had to find a new one. Searching for a job was a hassle, and it didn't help that there weren't many jobs that were part-time. On top of that, I was also a part-time college student, which only added to the stress. Weeks had passed, and I still hadn't found myself a stable job. However, that was until one of my friends had called me, wondering if I could watch his dog as he was going on vacation that week. The reason he chose me was because the sitter who originally watched his dog had recently moved 3 states away and he couldn't find anyone else. The pay was $600 for 3 days, which was still enough to get by, but meant I would still have to find another job soon. Desperate for pretty much any pay, I accepted his offer and agreed to look after his dog. His dog's name was Jen. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd with the personality of a teddy bear. Of course I was intrigued. I had arrived to his house where he had left a list of all the rules. Feed her at this time, let her out every 2 hours, give her walks, etc. Basically the usual responsibilities when owning any dog. Caring for a dog may seem easy, but it gets stressful after a while when you constantly have to let them out. The first night went smoothly with no accidents and had gotten done every rule on the list. However, that was until the second night of dog sitting, where something happened that would completely shock me. For some context, it was around 8 or 9 p.m. I had ordered some food and was watching a movie with Jem laying next to me. At one point during the movie, she sits up and perks her ears while tilting her head, as if she saw or heard something. The house was next to somewhat of a wooded area, so I had figured it was possibly a squirrel or some other critter. Soon after, though, she started looking around and began barking in the direction of the hallway. Almost immediately, she
Out of the
jumps
wood.
off the couch and runs to the hall. At this point, I started to get a little worried, as I didn't know what she could possibly be barking at. Curious, I follow her and see that she's barking at the door that led into the basement. I didn't even dream of opening that door, and instead pulled her away. However, she wouldn't comply and pushed the door open, fleeing down the stairs. Darkness filled the basement, and so I get out my phone to help light my way down. This was before Apple had built-in flashlights, so I used my screen to illuminate whatever was down there. After feeling around for it, I find the light switch and see Jem sitting by a small closet door. This was one of those closet doors with the see-through ridges, so I was able to slightly see inside. Ever so carefully, I approached the door and pulled Jem away, but not before taking a quick look inside. Staring back at me was an eye. Pretending not to notice,
Idle Coast.
I drag her out of there and run to the living room to call the police. I tried my absolute best to whisper into the mouthpiece, as I didn't want to make any noise. However, even with me being so quiet, it didn't help, as Jem was still barking. As I'm on the phone with the operator, I begin to hear someone coming up the wooden steps from the basement. The person slowly knocks, as if it were a way to frighten me even more. All the while, Jem was barking her head off.
Amuse-toi, ouais, j'aime.
C'est correct. Regarde-moi, concentre-toi, ok? C'est le moment dont t'as rêvé depuis que t'es petite. Tu peux le faire. Vas-y. Allez! Regarde!
Ghost.
Toutes tes fringales livrées à ta porte avec Skip.
Parce qu'un regard est une fenêtre sur l'âme. Parce que la poésie s'exprime dans vos yeux.
Oui, la poésie. C'est quand un problème de sécheresse oculaire. C'est surtout quelqu'un compétent que tu cherches, tu sais.
Octoréseau, on vous voit comme personne.
What would you say if I told you that you could increase your LSAT score by 15 points?
After taking the Blueprint LSAT prep course, I raised my score 15 points
By 17 points.
by 18 points.
Bunch of sirens being heard in the distance was music to my ears as they drew closer. All the while, I hear the person down there start running down the stairs and hearing a door open. Fortunately, police were fast to respond as they arrived to the house in minutes. As it turns out, police had found what appeared to be some secret room in the basement. Me, nor my friend, had any acknowledgement of this room and didn't even know what it was for. Our best guess was that it was some sort of wine cellar that was used back then. My friend paid me extra for the trouble, and I never dog sat for him again. I'm not sure if police ever found the man, or the possibility that he's still out there somewhere. The scariest part about this is that there was reason to believe the man had been hiding in that room for months. Inside were stolen items, beer cans, food, and even a sleeping bag. My friend had since moved cities recently, as him and his family couldn't shake off the paranoia. This just goes to show you that you can't even enjoy the safety and comfort of your own home.
Good, good. Oh, it feels good.
When I was about 15, my family and I moved into a large house. It was a relatively new home with 3 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a garage, and even a large basement. Both of my parents were in the upper medical industry and worked several hours a week. This meant that I would be home alone for the majority of the time while they were gone. I love staying alone, as I like to think of myself as mature and adult-like. At the time, we lived in somewhat of a rural area of Knoxville, Tennessee. Those who have been to or live in Knoxville will probably relate to what I'm talking about. While it was a nice city, the crime rate was high, and during the story, I got a taste of what that looks like. One evening, I had come home from school, and my parents were at work. Unfortunately, this was around the time where COVID was still rampant, so my parents had to work extra. 15-year-old me immediately hops onto Call of Duty to cure my boredom. I play some matches for a few hours or so before going up to my room and taking a nap. I'd say I slept for a good 2 hours or so before I awoke to a noise from the kitchen. Looking back, it kinda sounded like a clanking noise you'd hear when moving stuff around. I wake up and take a look at my clock. It was around 7 p.m. I was genuinely annoyed from this noise and put on my slides and went downstairs to see what it was. I ever so slowly turned the corner, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. There, in the kitchen, was a woman going through our fridge. She had her back toward me, so she couldn't see me or know that I was there. To provide a little more detail, she was not at all a pleasant-looking woman. She looked homeless, and looking back, I'm pretty sure she was. She wore torn shorts, a tank top, and some sort of wristband. I put my hands over my mouth and slowly went back upstairs. As much as I wanted and needed to call the police, I couldn't, as the only home phone we had was near the kitchen. Instead, I thought of another idea. My parents were friends with the neighbors from down the road, so I figured I'd go there and call the police. Now, I obviously couldn't have gone through the front door, so I did what anyone else would do. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out while gathering up the courage to fall. When I finally did, I hit the ground with only a sprained ankle and made my way over to the neighbors where I explained what happened. They, of course, instantly let me in to use their phone to call 911. In the meantime, they made a call to the hospital my parents worked at. The police ended up coming a lot faster than I thought and entered my house. Within a minute, they came out with an old, tired, lanky woman in handcuffs. However, she didn't try to get away or resist arrest. She seemed somewhat neutral about it, as if she had accepted her defeat. As it turns out, my theory was correct after all. She was a dangerous homeless woman who had broken into several homes in the area. My parents had come home soon after, where they had spoke with the police, where they then recommended we get cameras. And that's exactly what we did. The next day, my dad went out and installed a high-tech security system around the house. Surprisingly enough, the story didn't end there. until a few nights ago, where I had brought up the incident to my mom and asked if she had her eyes went wide with this look of fear and worry. When I asked what the matter was, she said, "Hey, and my eyes." She was gonna tell me something that I didn't know. When her and my dad were talking to the cops that day, the cops had mentioned something that would shock them.
Self-damage, okay.
When they had entered my house, they had found a woman standing outside of my bedroom door. In her hand was one of her kitchen knives that she appeared to have been gripping tightly. Let's just say that if I hadn't jumped out of my window, things probably wouldn't have ended well for me. Thankfully, we haven't had any break-ins as of today, and I hope it stays that way. For a bit of context, this happened to me about a week ago in the middle of the night. I'm a 27-year-old male and live alone in a small one-bedroom house in a rural area of Idaho. I was never the type to enjoy cities, nor was I the type to be around a lot of people. I just wanted a nice and quiet life, which is why I chose Idaho. Just this past week, I experienced something while home alone that I just had to write about. It was around 8 p.m. and I was at home cleaning the house when I hear my washing machine ring, letting me know that my clothes were done.